I'm very grateful to have you with us today, though. Let's get right into it. I want to welcome to Bad Faith Podcast Morgan Harper, who is running for Senate in the great state of Ohio. Welcome, Morgan.
Hi, yeah, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Now, Morgan, I was first made aware of you during your previous race in Ohio, and I wonder what you have learned from that previous experience. I mean, we on this podcast talk a lot about Senator Turner's race in the Cleveland area and the extent to which the establishment of the Democratic Party was not behind her and how that affected her outcomes. How are you feeling, especially this time around, challenging, not challenging a Democratic incumbent, but going up against a Democratic candidate who is the preferred candidate for the Democratic Party in Tim Ryan?
hmm Yeah, well, just a bit of background about why I find myself in politics altogether is like a lot of us, I just got fed up and started to understand that the system isn't really serving us. And it's only going to change if we start to have people who both get what's going on the ground and the outcomes of things not working and an ability and an understanding to run and eventually try to win to be in a position to implement good policy. And so when I ran last time, that was my first time running for anything. I'm pretty open about that. I really didn't, I wasn't like a student government person or anything, but just really felt like we had to change things and things were not going well and we need leadership. So learned a lot from that race. And then, just in terms of more than anything, just continuing to do the work, because one of the most common things that I heard is people don't trust politicians. And my message is, I'm with you. I don't either. That's why I'm running. And so in order to build those relationships, to have that authenticity and trust with an electorate, it can't just be about one campaign. We have to keep going. And, the political dynamics right now in Ohio are really interesting. I mean, when we look at the Senate race, one of the main reasons why I decided to get in this and launch this campaign specifically is we're not winning in the state of Ohio. And I put that we in, the category of people who believe in democracy and government doing anything at all. When Joe Biden wasn't able to win the state, it was a real wake-up call for those who needed another one. We've had many, that we need to be moving in a different direction here. And I waited around for a few months to see who was going to be entering the Senate race, especially when Rob Portman, the incumbent Republican, announced that he'd be retiring. This is a big moment. And in seeing that it was going to be another same old type of politician like Tim Ryan, and knowing that that would be a guaranteed loss. How do we know? We've done it before, right? And it's going to take something different to really have an ability to win this seat.
So I listened. You had a very interesting debate at the end of last month with Josh Mandel, who is a Trump-style Republican. At the end of which, and I want to get back substantively to that debate a little bit later, but at the end of that debate, in your closing remarks, you said that you were running principally because you don't believe that Tim Ryan can win.
And I am scared as a woman, as a Black person, as a daughter who has a mother who lives off of a monthly pension, of getting this guy anywhere near a seat of power in the United States Senate. And if I thought that Tim Ryan could beat him, I would not be standing here tonight.
Tim Ryan has been making this kind of explicit pitch to a lot of what I guess are perceived to be the gettable people you need to swing over, these white working class Ohio voters. What do you make of that approach, and how does it differ from your own?
What I've been saying since we launched this campaign, and I'm not hiding the ball here, right? It's like we put in our launch video. I'm pretty transparent, is that we need to start thinking more broadly about what is the real swing vote of a place like Ohio. And there's a lot of focus and some of it completely justified in terms of, looking at those Obama to Trump voters. But then we also need to recognize that, Black people, for example, are a big part of our coalition here to be able to win. And we have seen a precipitous drop off in Black voter turnout. So we need to stop thinking about Black people as this afterthought to our campaigns and start centering us as the focal point in our outreach, and that in a knowing that we need to get a 4% increase in Black voter turnout to have even a shot at this thing. And young people, for example, independent women. But even when we're focused on some of those Obama to Trump voters, my argument is those are a lot of people that when we talk about skeptical politicians, typical traditional politicians, in my conversations, I find that that's a common theme. And then being able to come to them with a message of, again, like you, frustrated, like you, understanding that we've had an economic system over 40 years that has stripped away our manufacturing center, that has allowed large multinational corporations to pretty much do whatever they want while we just take it and we're over it, and that there are policy changes that we can make that would do something about this, that would take on big pharma, that would take on big insurance companies. Somebody who is one of the biggest takers of lobbyist money in Washington, my opponent in the Democratic primary, Tim Ryan, somebody who has been in Washington as an elected official for 20 years, is never going to be able to authentically sell that message. It's not happening.
Yeah, I'm curious about this idea of appealing to these two different constituencies, the Obama to Trump voter and the Black voter, that, you know, a group among whom you need to raise turnout by 4 percentage points. And there is this kind of belief when we talk about it, or this like tacit understanding when we talk about those two groups, that the way to appeal to one group is very different than the way to appeal to the other group. When, of course, Obama, in fact, was able to appeal to both groups and get that black turnout high at the same time as getting those white working class voters, getting a bigger percentage of non-college educated white voters than Democrats in recent history. So I'm curious what your messaging strategy is like, and whether or not you see there being a lot of differences between the pitches that you're making to those groups.
You make a great point, Rihanna, and it's so true. And I get asked a lot, especially from, I would say Democrats who are living in some of the cities. For example, I'm based in Columbus. Columbus is the economic jewel of the state of Ohio at this point. Mm-hmm. There are certainly many people getting left behind in that growth, which is one of the main reasons why I ran my last campaign. But relatively speaking, Columbus is prospering and many other parts of the state are not. And so, people here, it's almost like you're coming back to report, on an archaeological expedition or something. It's like, what are you hearing out there in these places that aren't, the city? And my message is very similar things to what we're hearing from people on the west side of Columbus, right? This is no longer just an urban, rural, suburban thing. That's one of the things that gives me hope in this moment, is there is a pretty broad awareness about the way that we've been doing things isn't working for enough people for us to sustain this, and that we have to make some changes here. And so things like the opioid and fentanyl epidemic, that isn't discriminating against what part of the state that you live in. That is now, things that even in more affluent suburbs, people are starting to feel the impact of, and the loss of life, that wages aren't keeping up with the cost of living. That's everywhere. And this feeling that who is the culprit? It is a generation of political leadership that has let us down, because they've been bought off by the very same institutions and very large corporations that are responsible for some of the bad outcomes. And the only way that we're going to be able to change it is by having new people come in that are more community oriented. That is something that I'm hearing from all different types of people.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought the opioid pandemic, because I have been very frustrated. I've been saying this since I was a senior politics editor at The Intercept. Whoever wins the opioid conversation, whoever establishes themselves as, ably serving the community that's being devastated by that crisis, has an enormous benefit in any political context, whether at the time we're talking about 2018 midterms or whether it's 2020 or whatever it is. And it does feel sometimes like both parties, I would have expected perhaps Republicans to glom onto that issue a little bit more, but both parties have kind of left that fallow. And, my family is from the state, from Cleveland. And my aunt actually has for years worked with in the opioid addiction field. And it is very, very obvious how front of mind that is to so many people. And I'm curious if you can elaborate a little bit about the kinds of stories you're hearing around and what you would do in the state to help meet the needs of the people affected.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. It's weird how it isn't, centered more or featured more in our political discussions, because you don't have to spend much time talking to regular people who don't get paid to do politics in the state of Ohio before this issue comes up. And and one story that comes to mind is a woman who reached out to me because I joined a Zoom that was a get together for Kinship Care. And it's oftentimes, grandparents who are raising grandchildren, and there's a support network for them. And they invited me to speak. And a woman reached out to me as soon as I was done speaking, saying, I have more to say. Email me. Okay. And emailed her. She's from Northwest Ohio. And we get on a Zoom and she's telling me her story, which is one that is, heartbreaking doesn't even really begin to describe it. Having her daughter-in-law drop dead in their home in front of one of her 3 children and this woman's grandchildren, after struggling with addiction for 10 years plus. Her son also struggling with addiction. And now she's facing, as someone who was in her early 60s, raising her second generation of children, the three grandchildren who remain. And she makes $16 an hour, working for a social service organization in the Toledo area. And she's telling me her daycare costs are over $1,000 a month. And just what can I do? She's looking like, what am I supposed to do? Yeah. And my message is, there are things that we can do, but first we need people to recognize these stories. And so that was one of the most appalling things I would say from, that debate with Josh Mandel, from what a lot of people on the far right are putting out there, this obsession with freedom and, letting people do what they want. It's like, let's talk about what's actually happening here. We have young people who are dying. That is not freedom. That's not what freedom looks like to me. And if you can just gloss over that type of loss, then you shouldn't be anywhere near the United States Senate. I don't care what party you're coming from, right? For my opponent to claim to care so much about freedom and then try to restrict people's abilities to be who they are, it's pretty inconsistent and, in fact, quite disingenuous. The only reason why my opponent is spewing all of this nonsense is because he needs to do it to score political points, to be able to win the Republican nomination for this United States Senate seat. They try to divide us to prevent us from focusing on the things that really matter to most Ohioans. And what are those things? Most Ohioans I talk to across the state throughout this campaign are really concerned about making sure that their wages are keeping up with the cost of living. Most of the Ohioans I talk to are devastated by the role that the opioid and fentanyl epidemic has had on our state. Like the grandmother that I met who now is raising her 3 grandchildren because her daughter-in-law dropped dead in front of her from an overdose. And she can't keep up with the cost of those childcare for 3 children because she only makes $16 an hour. That's what Ohioans are focused on. And we have lost a lot of faith in people. But, just putting it on a positive note, though, I would say is, there are so many people who are doing so much work on the ground on this issue. I mean, I met a woman in Chillicothe, which is in Southern Ohio. She has been sitting outside by herself, bars in that area, passing out Narcan. For the past several years, she's distributed 4,500 Narcans to people who might be at risk of overdose. No one's funding her. So the grassroots network in the harm reduction community is very fierce and strong in doing what they can. We need our political leadership to catch up and resource these people.
I'm curious, for people who aren't as familiar with you, how do you identify politically and how did you come to your politics?
Well, it's been a somewhat organic journey for me, I would say. Just a quick background. I was born here in Columbus. I was given up for adoption. I lived in a foster home as a baby and then was adopted and raised on the east side of the city by my mom, who worked in the public school system. And at a very young age, I just had this awakening because of changes that were going on in my family. My parents were going through this crazy divorce, and it just woke me up to the fact that life can change overnight out of no fault of your own, and no one will necessarily be coming to save you. I mean, we had the benefit of a strong community around us that were able to lift us up. I saw, even just having one parent who had a stable job. My mom was in the union, the teachers union, and we were able to pull through that. But it just left me with this feeling of that type of vulnerability. That's not what this is supposed to be about. That isn't the American dream that we are all being sold here. And I got to figure out what's going on and make sure that people are able to be more okay, that we have this level playing field, that everybody, like I've always been really grateful for, gets a fair shot, especially being somebody who is adopted, getting the chance to live out my potential. That to me should be what I kind of call the opportunity guarantee. And that's not what we're experiencing here. So that just put me on this mission to figure out what's going on. How can I make it better? And, I got to college. I learned there was this thing called public policy. I was like, oh, none of this is an accident. Actually, there are people in positions of power that are designing, what's going on the ground. And I've got to figure out and become one of those people. And, I got a master's in it. I went to Stanford Law School, became a lawyer, went to Washington. And, I worked at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau after the financial crisis. And that was another very eye-opening experience for me, where I, again, naively thought that, we had people who get elected to these positions in Congress that have our best interests at heart. And I realized, as we were doing so much good work at the CFPB and, $12 billion back to 28 million consumers and all of that, that we had people in office that were stalling progress, that, the influence of money. And I just realized that policy wasn't going to be enough until we have better elected representation and engage a lot more people in the political process to make that happen. nothing will change. Nothing. The policy will not amount to anything if we don't have people who are ready to fight for it and implement it. So that's what really, led me to move from the policy lane to the political lane. And, I think people put a lot of different labels on it, but I'm coming from the place of, hey, here are the policies. Progressive policies to me are serious about solving the problems that we are seeing on the ground. And I can back all of the positions that I hold up with my both lived experience, my professional experience, and really I'm just working hard to build a coalition of people who understand that we don't have to live like this.
So a lot of people who listen to this podcast, they identify as progressives or leftists or, socialists or democratic socialists or social democrats or all these kinds of things, right? But a shared experience that I think a lot of them have is feeling like they very much invested in electoralism in the context of Bernie's 2016 and 2020 runs. They are very excited about policies like Medicare for all, really basic stuff that even Joe Biden ran on, like a $15 minimum wage that's yet to come into fruition, canceling student debt, universal housing policies, Green New Deal, all those kinds of things. And there's been a great deal of frustration that despite investing not only on the, national level, but also in any number of more local races, it hasn't manifested, despite having all of these progressives in office, an unprecedented number of them, it hasn't manifested in any real pressure on Congress as a whole to bend the knee at all to a progressive agenda, which is overwhelmingly favored by the majority of Americans. Even in this crisis point, even in the middle of this global pandemic and economic crisis, we can't seem to get the bare minimum. So what people want to know, I think, before they continue to invest in electoralism is, what you perceive to be, how you diagnose the problems, the intractability of progressive agenda items in the Senate currently, and what you would like to see happen differently if you were in office.
Well, I think one of the biggest risks we face is continuing to elect people who have no vision at all, right? And so, like my opponent in this Democratic primary, Tim Ryan, we think anything's going to really change with somebody like him becoming a United States Senator. Cool, Democrat, but who cares if you're not really fighting for anything? And we know that nothing will change from somebody who is one of the biggest takers of lobbyist money, in all of the House of Representatives, right? So we need to have not just Democrats, but better kind of Democrats. And I hear you, and that's something I hear on the ground a lot, the level of disillusionment. But I do think because I've been in this for so long. Like take for example something like the FTC. So that was my first job out of college. I worked at the Federal Trade Commission, and it was another key moment in my journey of, whoa, this isn't all that it's cracked up to be in terms of, federal government people working for us, where folks were just so obsessed with these, minutia of the workplace when I thought we were trying to all get there to, get change going and good policy. And so, but to see now, this is almost 20 years later, that we have somebody in charge of the FTC that is really coming with an agenda of trying to check, the corporate power that has held us back. And Lena Khan, for example, that's progress. That's a long period of time, admittedly, but something that would
also, Morgan, we're not old enough to be talking about 20 years ago. Don't do that to me.
Well, we're both aging gracefully, but I think we are getting old enough to talk about those things, which is crazy.
Boy.
But no, right. But really, I look at that and I'm like, this would be unimaginable, when in 2005, right? And so that keeps me going and seeing that, the seeds are just getting planted. I mean, especially in a place like Ohio where, for a lot of people, progressive have been, co-opted by a lot of people to not really have any meaning to it, but it takes people running and actually standing for something and actually having to defend what they stand for then these words to have meaning for people. So then they're able to make, to discern between different choices of candidates who are running. So that all is necessary to continue building, growing, electing people that are going to go into office and be about actually doing something. And, I find in Ohio, the other thing that I have to add on to that to make people believe, and that I now feel is necessary to get these institutions like Congress, like the Senate to work for us is self-imposing term limits. I will only serve 2 terms in the United States Senate. Part of the problem is that people have this careerist mindset and then they have to make these deals. I'm not doing that. 2 terms. And whether or not I'm ready to pass the baton is going. And there's going to be somebody else that I have trained up that I feel like is in a position to take over. Or, hey, I love a competitive primary better than the next person. So let's let somebody else go. But yeah, no, I think part of that mindset of the seniority, that you have to just continue to be there, that you never know when you're going to go, is what feeds into the stasis, the status quo that we have to overcome.
I think a lot of people listen to this are going to like to hear that. When AOC was running, she very famously said she'd rather be a one-term congressperson than someone who compromised her values. And people have mixed feelings over the course of the last few years about, to the degree to which that may or may not have panned out. And I'm wondering, when you look around at Congress, are you saying that you think that part of the issue with the Democratic Party is that we do have people like Nancy Pelosi who have become career politicians and have really become lightning rods, not just for conservative attacks, including in the debate that we're going to get to in a second, but among Democrats? I think the last poll that I saw from probably a year or so ago showed, I think, that 75% of Americans thought that Nancy Pelosi should step down.
Well, I'll tell you, one of the most common questions I get during this campaign, did not get it always during the last campaign, but one of the most common questions during this campaign is, what makes you a different kind of Democrat? Because I am over Democrats. Democrats shipped our jobs overseas. Democrats don't know how to manage our cities. Democrats show up and ask for our votes and we never hear from them again. What has a Democrat done for me lately? So that is the barrier that I have to overcome to even have a discussion with somebody about policy, right? Mm-hmm. And what I'm usually pointing to is, it is things like, I'm not taking corporate PAC money, that I am going to self-impose term limits. But the third thing that I would add, and that I do think distinguishes me from a lot of people, is I've already been to Washington. I don't need to get to the United States Senate or to Congress to have the cherry on top of a career or to get exposed to what that place is. I know exactly what it is. And that's why I left it, to be able to get here, to organize, to get better representation, because that's the only way anything's going to change. That's the only way that place is actually going to work for us. And then people are like, all right, maybe I'll keep listening to what you have to say. So I do think the careerist mindset is a huge problem. And what I believe even more traditional Democrats are understanding in this race and in this moment, and this is both in Ohio, probably nationally, is that our greatest risk is not that people are going to maybe not vote for a Democrat and then go vote for a Republican. It is that they are not going to vote at all. Mm-hmm. And that is not just people that, folks like to label as, oh, they don't have the best education or whatever. No, this is people who, I would argue that even people with more limited education actually know better than anybody about what's going on. But this is also people who maybe are in the suburbs, for example, and are just over it. That is our risk. That's what has to be overcome. And nobody, like my opponent, is going to be able to get people to believe or care. It's not possible, because I don't even buy it.
Hey YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.